Trash deserves to be burned. I wish your face had been burned too. My mother, Beth, looked down at the white steam rising from my arm and the skin that was rapidly turning red and blistered, and said this without a shred of hesitation. My sister, Allison, had opened the lid of the electric kettle she had been using to make tea and poured its contents directly over me without a second thought. Seconds later, a searing pain like my nerves were on fire shot through me and I screamed, collapsing onto the floor. Allison slammed the empty stainless steel kettle onto the island counter with a loud bang and clicked her tongue at the wet floor. "This is the worst. It's soaking wet because of you. What are you going to do about it?" she said, checking to make sure no water had splashed on her dress. "Stop making such a scene, Sarah. The guests can hear you," my mother said over her shoulder. At that moment, Chris, my lawyer, gasped as he took in the sight of me curled on the floor, my arm darkened and burned. "I'm calling an ambulance. And the police," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket with trembling hands. My mother, Beth, spun around quickly, putting on a pleasant, mask-like smile as she approached. "That's unnecessary. Sarah was just clumsy and spilled the kettle herself." But Chris ignored her and had already given the 911 operator our address. "It's a severe burn. It appears to have been deliberate. Please hurry." The instant he said that, my mother's smile vanished. The sound of sirens began faintly in the distance and grew louder by the second. Just as the paramedics burst in with a stretcher, my mother crouched next to me and whispered lowly in my ear, "Listen carefully, Sarah. This is an accident. You tripped on your own. You know what will happen if you say anything unnecessary, right?" The footsteps of the police entering the kitchen echoed like the drums announcing the start of a war. "It's okay, Sarah. You're safe now," Chris said, but my body continued to shake uncontrollably. At the hospital, the attending doctor's expression darkened the moment he saw my arm. Removing the necrotic tissue and dirt from my burned skin was excruciating, almost torture, even under anesthesia. Once the treatment was done and the painkillers began to take effect, partially clearing my mind, two police officers knocked on the hospital room door. "You must be Sarah Walker. May we speak with you for a moment?" The detective's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp and observant. "We've already spoken to your mother and sister about what happened," he continued, glancing at his notes. "According to them, you slipped on the kitchen floor, grabbed the kettle filled with boiling water, and ended up scalding yourself. They say it was purely an unfortunate accident." I had expected this, but it was a lie that was too perfectly rehearsed. The detective continued, "And your mother was a bit concerned that, due to recent work stress, you've been mentally unstable and distracted. My mother was trying to paint me as a mentally unstable daughter to cover up my burns. That way, if I claimed Allison had done it, it could be dismissed as delusion or paranoia." Chris started to speak, but I stopped him with a hand. "Detective, my mother and sister are lying." My voice was hoarse but firm. I did not slip. I did not touch the kettle. I was standing 6 feet away from the kitchen island. The detective frowned, pausing mid-note. "It was Allison who held the kettle and poured it on me. She aimed directly at me, looking me in the eyes." The room fell into a frozen silence. "That is a very serious accusation, Sarah. This is treated completely differently from a simple accident or injury case." "I understand, but I have evidence." I indicated my smartphone on the bedside table, cradling my aching left arm. Minutes before the incident, the kitchen was being set up for my birthday party. And there's a pet camera in the living room. The detective's eyes sharpened. At home, my mother had installed a high-definition network camera to monitor the dog she doted on, giving a clear view of both the living room and kitchen. And there's a motive. This wasn't just a fight. It's about money. "Money?" the detective asked, skeptical. "Yes, a $350,000 investment and the BMW used as collateral." I felt ready for the first time to address the twisted core of my family relationships. 3 years earlier, in the dim office of my father, Richard, who ran Walker Construction, the company was nearly bankrupt. Yet my parents refused to face reality. They blamed the economy, blamed the banks, and refused to admit that their reckless spending was the real reason for the company's decline. I was 22 at the time. While still in college, I had self-taught trading and concentrated investments in tech stocks, already amassing significant liquid assets. That day, I placed a $350,000 check on my father's mahogany desk. So you finally decided to be a good daughter. Took you long enough, he snorted, acting as if it were my obligation to provide the money. My mother chimed in. Sarah, now you can contribute to the family. Allison brings joy with her looks and charm, but you'll support us with your wallet. I let that humiliating remark slide without expression. I then pulled from my bag a thick stack of documents prepared by my lawyer and spread them across the desk. Dad, this isn't a donation. It's a business investment. That's why you need to sign this contract. My father frowned irritably and flipped through the documents roughly. A contract? Between family members? Family has nothing to do with business. If you don't sign, I'll tear up the check right now. Faced with my unwavering tone, he clicked his tongue but reluctantly took the pen. Specifically, the contract stipulated that all assets purchased with this investment would remain under my first priority lien until full repayment. And if they defaulted, ownership would immediately transfer to me. The very first thing they wanted was a new company car. It was a luxury SUV for my mother and Allison to go to the mall, and for my father to pull up to the golf course in style. The day after my investment funds were deposited, they didn't hesitate to head to a high-end car dealership and ordered a fully loaded pearl white BMW X7 worth $120,000. The vehicle was registered under the company for tax purposes, but it was implicitly understood that Allison would be the primary user. What they didn't realize was that the moment that BMW was purchased with my money, it legally became a moving collateral under my control. That detail would set the stage for the tragic night 3 years later, and ultimately, my complete legal victory. From the day the white BMW X7 was delivered, Allison acted as if she were royalty, more so than ever. The following 3 years were filled with humiliation and patience on my end, but I had a reason I couldn't leave home. It was to ensure that every clause of that contract was enforced. I became their watcher, a reserve enforcer of sorts. After the family went to sleep, I accessed the company's books from my room, checking every fund flow in detail. I carefully saved evidence of their extravagance, Allison's traffic tickets, and recordings of my mother's abusive remarks into a hidden cloud folder. Then, 3 years later, my father's company began to struggle financially again, and interest payments to me were delayed for 2 consecutive months. By contract, I could exercise my lien after the 3rd month of default. That timing coincided almost exactly with my 25th birthday. I intended to celebrate that day as my independence anniversary. But 2 weeks before the party, that plan was shattered at breakfast. Unbelievable. My Instagram followers passed 10,000, and the manager is promoting me to senior sales assistant. My mother immediately lit up, hugging Allison. That's wonderful, Allison. My daughter finally recognized for her beauty and talent by the world. Then she turned to me, her eyes cold and calculating. Here's the plan. We'll throw a big promotion party at the end of the month, invite the relatives, neighbors, Dad's business contacts. Everyone. We'll showcase Allison's success. I paused, quietly attempting to protest. That day is my birthday, and I've already booked a restaurant. My mother snorted. A restaurant? Waste of money. Cancel it. The house is bigger and grander, and catering is cheaper. And combining your modest birthday with Allison's extravagant celebration kills 2 birds with 1 stone. You always try to disrupt the family unity. I stayed silent for a moment, calculating rapidly in my mind. If I invited my business partners as Allison's guests, they would see the family's reality firsthand. They could become my strongest witnesses in any future legal proceedings. Fine, I'll cancel the restaurant. We'll hold it at home. My mother smiled triumphantly, immediately taking out her notepad and giving me instructions. That's better. You handle the food and drinks. Charge it to Dad's company. The champagne for Allison must be top tier. For the guests, relabeled cheap bottles. Allison added imperiously, and clean the house thoroughly, especially the garage. I want my BMW displayed in the best spot. Polish the floor and set up spotlights. She planned to flaunt a car that wasn't hers as proof of her success. I chuckled inwardly. I added my lawyer and investor friends to the guest list as originally intended. On the day of the party, the living room and garden were filled with pink and gold balloons, reflecting my mother's flamboyant taste. I spent the morning in a black apron, running around completely as a free servant. In the garden's most prominent spot sat the white BMW X7, which I waxed the night before. Allison posed in front of it like a model, boasting to arriving guests. Yes, my work is going great. This car is a reward for myself. You've got to show the results of your effort. Unaware neighbors showered her with praises. So impressive. What a young achiever. Among the crowd were my friends, the ones I had invited deliberately. One of them, my lawyer Chris, came in a tailored suit and quietly sipped a drink. You're friends with Sarah? She's a bit plain, isn't she? You've got to shine like me to make it in this world. Chris smiled politely, maintaining his gentlemanly composure. Sarah is very reliable and trustworthy. By the way, that's a beautiful car. Is it under your father's company? Allison scoffed, swirling her champagne glass. Dad's company? I basically support it. In practice, it's mine. I plan to formally transfer the title soon. Her words were legally fatal and utterly false, but she was drunk on her own lies. Behind Chris's glasses, a cold, calculating glint of securing testimony shone. Meanwhile, my father Richard cornered my investor friend Paul, lecturing on the glories of his construction business. Kids these days are afraid of risk, but not me. I've gotten where I am because I take big swings. Paul already knew that the source of that big swing was the pocket money of the daughter silently serving drinks in front of him. Me. But he simply nodded along. I see. So your funding came from the bank? Or perhaps with some help from your family? When Paul prodded gently, my father lowered his voice. No, the bank trusts my personal business sense. Family, they're nothing but money drains. Especially the younger one. No talent at all, and she should be grateful we even let her live at home. They didn't realize it. The very friends of the Sarah they belittled were the people who held the keys to their fate. My mother then shouted from the living room, Sarah, is the cake ready yet? Bring out the tea before Allison's speech. Why are you so slow? I silently returned to the kitchen. Allison followed, wanting tea to warm her throat before her grand speech. Hey, I told you to bring me tea before my speech. I need to stay hydrated. And that guy with the glasses, is he your friend? She meant Chris, my attorney, whom she'd been talking to earlier. When I mentioned the BMW, he kept smirking. Rude man. Probably jealous of someone successful like me. He wasn't smirking, Allison. He was disgusted. She froze. What? What's that supposed to mean? He's my lawyer, and he's the one who drafted the purchase contract for that BMW you were bragging about. I looked her straight in the eyes across the counter. Which means he's the only person here who knows that the car wasn't bought with Dad's company money. It was bought with my $350,000 investment, and legally, it's collateral under my control. I watched all the color drain from her face. Liar, there's no way someone as plain as you has that kind of money. It's not a lie. Check the registration and insurance. You'll see. Primary lien holder, Sarah Walker. I dealt her the decisive blow. Her breathing turned ragged, her eyes darting desperately as she tried to reject reality. You… With an incoherent shriek, she lunged toward the electric kettle on the counter, the one filled with freshly boiled water. I watched in slow motion as reason left her eyes, replaced by pure malice. Without hesitation, she swung the kettle, its lid already open, straight toward me. The boiling water arced through the air and crashed onto my left arm and chest. My scream shook the kitchen. Immediately after, Allison slammed the empty kettle onto the counter with a loud metallic clang. The moment my scream echoed into the living room, the music and conversations ceased instantly. Allison cracked the swinging door open just enough to peek inside, then turned back with a bright, cheerful smile and clapped her hands. Everyone, so sorry. Sarah had one of her clumsy moments again. Nothing serious, so please enjoy the party. Her voice was light and bubbly, and many guests believed her, returning to their conversations. But only my lawyer, Chris, and my investor, Paul, remained still. Chris quietly slipped his hand into his suit jacket and opened a recording app on his phone. My mother picked up the empty kettle Allison had slammed down. Then, wiping away fingerprints with her apron, she rolled it to the floor by my feet. Listen carefully, Allison. When the police arrive, this is what you say. She didn't whisper to me. She spoke to her panicked daughter in a low, controlled tone. Sarah slipped on some water. She lost her balance, grabbed the kettle on the counter, and spilled it on herself. You tried to help, but you couldn't reach her in time. Got it? Allison nodded frantically, her face pale. I get it. I didn't do anything. She slipped on her own. It's not my fault. She kept repeating it like a spell, trying to implant the false memory into herself. My mother then splashed the water from the sink across the floor, deliberately creating a slippery surface. There, perfect. Sarah, you understand, don't you? If you say anything stupid and ruin Allison's future, you'll have nowhere left to belong. Oh my, how careless of me. Poor Sarah slipped and fell. My mother pressed her fake tears to her cheek as the police entered. One officer began examining the scene. At first glance, it did look like a tragic household accident, but he sensed something off, because in the corner of the living room, Chris approached him calmly, offering his business card and whispering something. I represent the victim, and I have a recording of everything that was just said. This was not an accident. Chris spoke softly, but it was enough to harden the officer's expression. That was the moment my counterattack began. I was moved from the ICU to a private room in the general ward about a day after the incident. Even with painkillers continuously dripping through the IV, the sensation of burning skin along my left arm and chest never fully subsided. Dr. Baker stood by my bedside, holding a thick binder. His voice was clinical, emotionless, as he explained the extent of my injuries. Will the scars remain? When I asked, he adjusted his glasses and answered honestly. There is a high likelihood of keloid scarring. Reconstructive surgery can lessen the appearance, but your skin will not return to its original state. Including rehabilitation, you're looking at a minimum of 6 months for full recovery. I didn't cry. They had branded me with something that would never disappear. Then, I decided that I would leave an indelible mark on their lives as well. Doctor, I need a detailed medical report. Please include photos. We'll use it in court. As the doctor left, there was a knock at the door. Chris, my lawyer, and Detective Jackson, who had questioned the family yesterday, entered the room. I had the bed raised and turned to face Jackson. Miss Walker, we spoke again with your mother and sister yesterday. They still insist this was an accident, that you slipped on the wet floor. The detective spoke without opening his notebook. However, our on-site inspection uncovered several inconsistencies. Chris interjected. Inconsistencies? It's more than that. The location where Sarah supposedly slipped, the position of the kettle, and the spread of the hot water. Analyzing the trajectory, it's far too horizontal to have spilled from a fall. This is clearly the result of someone intentionally pouring from a height. The detective faced me, his eyes serious. We now have circumstantial evidence supporting your testimony, but to request an arrest warrant, we need definitive proof of intent to harm. I quietly played my trump card. Detective, have you checked the network camera in the living room? Jackson shook his head. Your mother said it was broken and not recording. We checked. The SD card had been removed. Just as I expected, my mother had carefully tried to destroy the evidence. But she forgot one thing, I said, glancing at Chris. The camera not only stores footage on the SD card, it automatically backs up to the cloud, and I control that cloud account and its monthly payments. Jackson's eyes widened. So, there's footage? Yes, last night I had Chris preserve the data from the server. Jackson stared at the screen intently, then slowly looked up. And he stood up and straightened the collar of his jacket. I'll request a warrant from the judge immediately. We'll begin investigating for assault and embezzlement. Embezzlement? I asked. Jackson smiled faintly. Yes, we looked into the BMW your sister was bragging about. There's strong suspicion she misused company assets for personal gain. The police had already uncovered more than I had anticipated. The counterattack was ready. Next came the execution. The next afternoon, Chris positioned himself outside my family home via video call, under the pretense of asset preservation while I watched from my hospital room. 2 police cars slid silently into the driveway. Detective Jackson and a group of uniformed officers stepped out. The intercom rang. After a moment, the door opened. It was my mother who appeared. What is this? It's barely 11 a.m. But Jackson ignored her and presented the warrant. This is an arrest warrant for Allison Walker and a search and seizure warrant for this residence. Suspected offenses, second-degree assault, and evidence tampering. As my mother screamed, "You can't be serious!" the officers entered forcefully. Minutes later, Allison, handcuffed behind her back, was dragged out by two officers. "Let me go! Mom, Dad, do something!" She screamed hysterically. "I didn't do anything! It was an accident! Why am I being taken?" As she was shoved toward the back seat of the police car, she noticed Chris filming with his phone. "Sarah, I know you're watching. This is your doing, isn't it? I'll never forgive you. I'll hate you for the rest of my life." She roared like a wild animal, but the officers held her head down and pushed her inside. I watched the taillights fade from the video feed. "Thank you, Chris. Now we start. Do it thoroughly." "Of course. They'll return everything they took from you, with interest." After the call ended, the hospital room fell silent once again. It was the first quiet moment since I had begun reclaiming my life. 3 days after the arrest, Allison remained in custody. Normally, she would have been released on bail, but the court denied it, citing the risk of evidence tampering. My parents had been informed by the court-appointed attorney that a prison sentence was inevitable unless a settlement with the victim was reached. Without it, several years incarceration was possible. Then they were summoned to Chris's law office. I monitored the meeting via video call from my room. On screen, my parents looked as if they had aged 10 years in just a few days. Let me be blunt. My client, Sarah Walker, is willing to submit a petition to the prosecution to reduce the punitive demand against your daughter and withdraw part of the civil damages claim, Chris said. My mother looked up, her eyes pleading. "Really? Oh, Sarah wouldn't abandon her family." "Don't misunderstand," Chris cut her off coldly. "This is not mercy. This is a transaction with clear conditions." He held up 2 fingers. The conditions are simple. First, repay immediately, in full, the $350,000 investment Miss Walker made in your company 3 years ago, plus unpaid interest and late fees. A total of $420,000. My father groaned, a sound of disbelief escaping his lips. "There's no way we have that kind of money. The accounts are frozen and the house is under lien." "As expected," Chris said, expression calm as ever. "Then here's the second option. The only realistic choice." He pulled another document from the stack and placed it in the center of the table. Under the special provisions of the contract, ownership of the collateral, the 2024 BMW X7, will be transferred immediately to Miss Walker. Additionally, you will agree to a permanent restraining order. No contact and no approach within a 3rd-mile radius of Miss Walker by any means, now or in the future. My mother's voice trembled as she spoke. "You mean, you're taking the car away from Allison?" Chris removed his glasses and slowly wiped the lenses. "Beth, I think you still don't understand. The choice is simple. Lose the car and regain your freedom, or keep the car and spend several years behind bars." My father buried his face in his hands. My mother bit her lip, tears streaming down her cheeks. But they weren't tears for their daughter. They were the bitter tears of their pride and status being stripped away. "Sarah," my mother whispered in a shaving voice, "is she laughing at us?" Chris glanced at the monitor camera, then turned back to them. "No, she is no longer looking at you. She's watching only the future you took from her and the legal steps she is taking to reclaim it." After a long silence, my father shakily picked up a pen. He signed the document roughly and tossed the pen aside. My mother, still crying, signed next to him. Deal closed. In that instant, one of the many chains that had bound me for years shattered with a satisfying sound. It wasn't revenge, it was pure business. For the first time in years, I felt I could truly breathe. The day I was discharged, the sky outside was ironically clear and blue. Chris was waiting at the hospital entrance. Next to him, gleaming in the sunlight, was the white BMW X7, freshly washed. He smiled and handed me the keys. I pressed the accelerator and slid out of the parking lot. The burn on my left arm stung slightly, but it was proof that I was alive. I gripped the wheel and entered a new destination into the navigation system, a city in a neighboring state far from my childhood home. There, my new apartment and office were ready. A year had passed since that night. I now run my own investment consulting firm, Phoenix Capital. The burn on my left arm remains, a permanent mark of survival and resilience. News of my family reached me only through rumors and occasional reports from Chris. Allison ultimately received a 2-year prison sentence, suspended for 4 years. Her first offense and my petition spared her from actual incarceration, but the cost was severe. Her record for assault and abuse of a sibling spread across the internet like wildfire. Her real name and photo became a permanent digital tattoo, and the 10,000 followers she once boasted about turned into critics. She struggled to find work and now reportedly survives with night shifts at a remote warehouse, avoiding all human contact. My father's construction company collapsed the moment my financial support was withdrawn. During the investigation, long-standing accounting fraud and bank loan scams were uncovered, and he was arrested and charged with fraud. Their family home was seized and auctioned off. My mother lost her property and her social status, ending up in a cheap apartment on welfare. She still tells anyone who will listen that it's all Sarah's fault, but no one believes her delusions anymore. I am now behind the wheel of that white BMW X7, driving along the coastline. Here, I have friends who respect me, work that challenges and fulfills me, and above all, freedom that no one can take from me. The car accelerates smoothly, leaving the past behind, racing into an endless future. Their story is over, but mine is just beginning.